Board Online, Board Offline. Today we have a preview of Earth Rising, which is going to be funding on Kickstarter on April 26th. Now, before we get down into this preview, I do want to mention our sponsor, Board Game Co. This is a great website where you can buy, sell, and trade games. They have a great selection of games to choose from. If you're just looking to build out your collection, buy more games, get more stuff into your collection, they can help you do that. They have a huge selection, a fantastic selection to choose from, so be sure to check them out for that. Now, if you want to get rid of some games, they also will buy games from you. They have an easy-to-use system. Go over to their website, check that out as well, and see how you can sell games to them. Now, if you're just looking to trade games, you want to kind of swap some stuff out, they have a really, really cool feature for doing that. If you go to Board Game Geek and have a trade list set up over at Board Game Geek, you can then take your Board Game Geek username, go to Board Game Co., drop your username in over there. They will compare your Board Game Geek trade list with their stock and build a custom trade list right there on their website. It happens very quickly, very easy to use, facilitates a trade very easily, and then you're good to go. I've actually traded with them before. It was a very simple process. I really enjoyed it, so be sure to check that out. If you do check them out, click on the link in the description below so they know I sent you over there. Board Game Co. makes it easy to buy, sell, and trade your way into a better collection. All right, without too much else, before I talk to you up here about Earth Rising, I'm going to take you down to the game topper and show you a little bit about how it plays and what's going on there. All right, so here is generally the setup of Earth Rising. Let's talk through what we've got going on here. And of course, remember, this is a prototype. The final version of the board is, I believe, going to be just the round circle area you see here. The square pieces will be cut off, and so that'll make these pieces here actually fit up against the board. As it is, I kind of set them up as best I could to make everything fit in the shot, and just to kind of work with the prototype board as it is. So what you've got here is 6 different sectors of society, of the world, and it is generally showing you the ecological situation, what we've got going on. So you see the orange sector here is energy. Over here, we've got industry for yellow. Green is agriculture, of course. Infrastructure is blue. That's right. Infrastructure, right? Yeah, infrastructure. Purple over here is culture. And then red is politics, okay? And now, each of these has these 2 pieces next to them, right? The smaller piece is a minor burden that's related to that sector. The bigger piece is a major burden related to that sector. So, for instance, here for politics, the minor burden is biodiversity loss. The major burden is climate change. You'll also see that the major burden for one sector is the same as the minor burden for the sector to its left. So you've got climate change here for the energy sector. And then this right here, I know it's kind of cut off, is chemical pollution. And that's important because these two are actually linked. Now, on the burdens, you see these black circles. These are strain. The amount of strain on a burden is going to be really important as the game goes along, because if you ever have 15 strain on the major and minor burden of the same type combined, then you're going to have an ecological collapse. Now, in the sectors themselves, and it's a little faint on the board, but there are 4 different circles on each of the sectors when you begin the game. Each of those circles represents a spot for one population, and you want population to be in the sectors because that takes them out of the center of the board. The center of the board represents population and poverty. Population and poverty is one of the ways you're going to get additional strain added to these burdens. And then also in these circles, so each circle, besides having one population, can also have one practice. And the practices can either be unsustainable, as you see here, anti-environmentalism, or they can be sustainable, natural capital accounting. Unsustainable practices are another way that strain will be added to the burdens, but sustainable practices actually can remove strain. So that's one thing that you're looking to do, is start converting everything to sustainable practices. Every practice also can hold two population. It basically employs two population. And you can see, though, that if I were to add an additional practice here, let's say I use the sustainable practice of government transparency and I put it here, well, that's great. That's going to help us start dealing with the strain situation, but it doesn't help with the population at all, because there's no more space for the population in the politics sector right now. So how do we actually increase space for that? Well, if you're able to get all the strain off of this major burden here, and you'd actually have to get it to where you only had one strain here, because the strain equalizes among the two. And so, if you had two strain on biodiversity loss, actually you'd have one on biodiversity loss and one on climate change. But if you can get all the strain off of one of the major burden here, you could then, let's say that you had this politics card. You could discard any politics social influence card into the discard pile, and then that would allow you to flip this over, transform that major burden, and now you have more space. And you can see now that you have these two new spaces, you have three practices on the board. Each practice can have two population. And so you can have a total of 6 people out, and so you can put those on the board. And now you're going to be getting less strain from population in poverty, because it's every 3 population in poverty provides 1 strain when you check for population. And so now you would only be getting 5 instead of 6 strain added to the board. Now, I said you had to discard a card to transform that. If you were playing as the grassroots politician, then you in fact wouldn't need to discard anything. You, as a free action, can transform your own sector. So that's probably a good point to actually discuss the different characters in the game. So let's look here. Well, let's start with the grassroots politician. So you can see, as an action, you may check the next 2 cards in the social influence deck. That's this deck right here. And rearrange them. For each sustainable practice in the politics sector, you may check 1 extra card. So let's say that we had managed to get 3 sustainable practices in politics like that. Then the person playing as the grassroots politician could then, as an action, draw 2 cards plus 3 more, draw 5 cards, and then rearrange them as they saw fit. So you can see you got an industry card, you got 2 industry cards here, you got agriculture, there's a politics card, infrastructure card. Rearrange them as needed. Not only that, but there are bad cards in here, 6 of them total. And so this is called status quo strikes. If you are using the grassroots politician, you could potentially hold one of these off, because let's say that she drew the 5 cards, and so now she can make sure status quo strikes is the 5th card down, and then other players are going to know when that card is coming up, and so then you can plan around it. Now let's see here. We've got the eco investor, right? So that's the infrastructure character. Whenever drawing, you may draw 1 extra card and look at it, then either give it to another player or place it at the bottom of the deck. For each sustainable infrastructure practice, you may draw and decide for 1 extra card. So similar to the politician, except for instead of rearranging and leaving stuff on top of the deck, they actually are either taking it or putting it at the bottom of the deck. That's another way to deal with status quo strike. So let's say that he was able to draw enough cards to get this status quo strikes card, mass deregulation. Well, he could keep all these and then take this one and stick it right at the bottom of the deck. And now it is out of the way for now. Then we've got the climatologist, who is the energy character. At any time during the 4 actions of anyone's turn, you may move 1 strain to a different ecological burden. For each sustainable energy practice, you may move 1 extra strain. So, you know, let's say, let's get some more strain out here. All right, so if you were playing as a climatologist, and let's say you had 1 sustainable practice, and you see, oh, look, chemical pollution is getting to be a bit of a problem. We've got 10 total strain for chemical pollution. Obviously, we get to 15. That's when we have an ecological collapse. And also, you know, we had the similar problem with climate change goes this way. So water withdrawal is actually not much of a problem right now, because you can see there's 4 here and 2 up there. So that's only 6, but we really need to deal with this chemical pollution problem. Well, we could look and see, well, look, biodiversity loss has 1 strain there and 1 strain there, so it could handle taking a couple more. And so what you could do is you could take a strain from chemical pollution here and let's say 1 from over here, and then you could toss it both onto biodiversity loss, and then you're all right. It might even be better to put it over on that one, but for this example, we'll just throw it down here. And so that's a good way to be able to keep shuffling strain around, trying to keep any one spot from getting too many and trying to prevent that ecological collapse. Then we've got the activist. As an action, you may place a protest token on any unsustainable practice. This allows players to flip that unsustainable practice instead of disbanding it. For each sustainable culture practice, you may place 1 extra protest token. So what that means is, normally, let's say we were playing we're playing as the activist, right? And so over here, you can see we've got discrimination as a unsustainable practice for culture. So normally, the way the activists can get rid of a unsustainable practice in their own area is they play, we've got discrimination right here, and then it disbands that practice and it goes away. Now, disbanding a practice has some downside, because now we only have 1 practice left in culture, which means these 2 population would go back into poverty. Well, instead, let's say that the activist had placed a protest token on that unsustainable practice and then played this card. What it would allow her to do is then flip that directly to cultural diversity and have the sustainable practice immediately out, instead of disbanding the unsustainable practice first before putting another sustainable practice out. Next up, we've got the ecologist. As an action, you may place a regeneration token on any sustainable practice. This reduces 1 extra strain during the next societal strain phase. For each sustainable agricultural practice, you may place 1 extra regeneration token. So basically what this means is, for, let's say we were here, right? Or let's say he placed a regeneration token here on wind power. During the societal strain phase, you go around the board and you're checking to see how much strain the practices are going to be putting onto the different burdens, all right? Well, we're good here. Like, we've got 3 sustainable practices here, so that actually removes 3 strain. Okay. Over at culture, we have 1 sustainable and 1 unsustainable. So it is 0. It doesn't remove and it doesn't add anything either. Over here, we have 2 unsustainable practices. So 2 strain is actually added over here. All right. But then right here, we have, without this, we have the null situation again, and nothing's added or subtracted. But when you add that regeneration token, now 1 additional strain is taken away. So we actually do manage to take 1 away. And then finally, we have the innovator. As an action, you may place 1 startup token into the center of the board and then place 1 meeple on it. These do not count towards poverty strain. For each sustainable industrial practice, you may place 1 extra startup token. So that lets you put these tokens out here, place a meeple on it, and now that meeple doesn't count towards the strain. So right now, still getting 5. Let's say that there was an additional sustainable practice here in the industry sector, and so then he could put another startup out here. And now, because there's only 4 complete sets of 3, there's only 4 strain being caused by poverty. So that's all the characters in the game. I'm trying to think of some other things that we need to talk about here. Well, you know what? We kept talking about the ecological collapse. So let's talk about that real quick. Let's say we've got 15 strain on chemical pollution, right? Well, that's going to cause an ecological collapse. The first thing you do is you take 10 strain total from chemical pollution. That's 5 from each sector. So take 5 from here. All right. Oh, that's 4 or 5. All right, and then 5 from here. Now the trick is, of course, when you take 5 from this one, oops, come on. It's then going to equalize with the other burden here. And so the minor burden always has to have more or equal strain. So there you go. That's what ended up happening over there. You then draw a social influence card. It's culture. So we're going to place this ecological collapse token on the leftmost vacant space in culture. And now that space cannot be used for anything, not for population, not for a practice, nothing. So it is completely useless for the rest of the game. And that population goes into poverty. And the final thing you do for an ecological collapse is you take this plus 1 degree token and you put it into the center of the board. And so now every time you take strain from population, you take 1 additional strain. If a second ecological collapse happens, you'll actually put this out on the board plus 2, and those add up together. So now you're taking an additional 3 strain. The third one, that's right, plus 3. So now you're taking an additional 6 strain. And then if you take a 4th ecological collapse, that's it, game over. The other way that the game can end is by reaching the end of 20 years. If at the end of 20 years, so these are just the year cards to help keep track of what year you're on, 2021 to 2041. If at the end of 20 years, you haven't managed to flip all of the burdens, transform all the burdens into the center of the board, then that's also game over and you lose. On the other hand, if at any point you do manage to flip all of these burdens into the center of the board, and then you manage to keep them there by the end of your turn, meaning that you've survived the various strain checks and all that kind of stuff, by the end of your turn, all of the burdens are transformed into the center of the board, then that is how you can win the game. One last thing before we go back up top for some final thoughts on this. Though the cool thing with these minor burdens is that because the idea is that everything's connected, if this minor burden is still here, you're not able to, if these major burdens to the left and right of the minor burden are still out, you're not able to put that minor burden out yet. So you actually have to work with the other sectors to be able to get your sector completely straightened out. So it would actually require this one to be out and this one to be transformed before this biodiversity one could be transformed and put out like that. And so on a player's turn, what they're going to do is they're going to take 4 actions, and these are the different actions they have. They can disband an unsustainable practice, which I showed you earlier how you disband them. You can create a sustainable practice, which is the exact same thing. You discard a card, but you put the sustainable practice out. So public-owned utilities, you just put it out just like that. You can clean up 4 strain from any ecological burden. Just take 4 strain right off the board. You can give another player 1 card. You can draw an extra card, or you can reshuffle the discard pile back into this deck at any time. Another way to try to avoid some SQS cards, the status quo strikes, and also a way to get a hold of some cards you need to disband or create practices. The player takes 4 actions. They can repeat actions that, basically any 4 actions you want to take on your turn, that's what you can do. After you take your turn, then that's when you're going to check the strain for population. You're going to check strain for practices. And then last, you'll flip to the next year. I did forget to mention at the beginning of your turn, you also draw two influence cards into your hand. Okay, so some final thoughts on Earth Rising. I have had a blast learning this game, playing this game. It is I would say on the same level as, basically, I would say it's not quite a gateway game if you are learning it yourself as a newcomer to the hobby. But I would say that somebody who knows the game well, knows how it plays, could easily introduce new people into the hobby with this game. And I think the fact that it's a cooperative game, of course, makes that a little bit easier. I think that it's very accessible. And then the theme, well, let me put it this way. With the theme, when I first got into the hobby, one of the earlier games that I played was Pandemic. And I remember the good old days when Pandemic just seemed like a fun game to play. And there was no real belief that this might be something we're facing down at any particular time in our lifetimes. And here we've got a theme that has that same kind of we got to be careful what we're doing, because Earth Rising is very much rooted in real life situations as far as where we're kind of taking the planet, what we're driving towards if we don't make some changes. But then it also is rooted in what are the changes we can make? What is what are the things that we can do to try to steer this ship in a different direction, in a more positive direction, in a direction that is sustainable? The whole concept of this game is about unsustainable practices and sustainable practices. And I think it's really, really cool that, you kind of have the two sides of the same coin thing going on, almost literally, with the tokens, the practice tokens, that go on the board, because it's literally one side is one thing, one side is the other. So, you have discrimination as the unsustainable practice, and then you have cultural diversity as the sustainable practice. Or in infrastructure, you've got greenhouse gas emissions versus micro mobility. So a lot of just real life stuff here. For in the industry sector, you have carbon credits as the unsustainable practice and feed-in tariffs as a sustainable practice. Let's see, agriculture, food import reliance versus community-supported agriculture. In politics, low-wage jobs versus universal basic income. Let's see, which one haven't I found yet? I think energy is the only one I haven't seen. We've got energy inefficiency versus energy conservation. So, seeing this stuff actually gave me a lot to think about what is going on right now that, for instance, the carbon credits and the feed-in tariffs. That's one that I want to read up more on, because I really was at a point where I thought carbon credits were legitimately something that could help. This seems to be suggesting that it's not a sustainable practice. So, and then it has this other thing that possibly could be the alternative. So much of this is educational in a way, but you don't feel like it's an educational game. You know what I'm saying? It's really thought-provoking, intriguing, and really provides interesting decisions in the gameplay while providing a lot of interesting, thought-provoking ideas to contemplate and consider long after you're done playing. I really like how you have the burdens around the board and how they're all linked together. So all the sectors are linked. If one sector starts going bad, it's going to affect the sector next to it. And you can transform the burdens. And one thing I didn't talk about in that overview is that, you can transform the burdens, but then if you don't still take care of that sector, and if that sector starts getting overstrained, and there's not enough, the minor burden that's there gets more than 5 strain tokens, so it more than it can handle, then the major burden ends up having a recession, flips back out to the area that it was before to take on some of that strain. And there's so many gameplay mechanisms in this that are intentionally built with the theme in mind. The theme is completely intertwined with the mechanisms in the game, and that's just a really cool thing to see, especially with a game that's trying to simultaneously be both fun and thought-provoking. I love the different characters, or I think they're called characters, but the different roles you can play. They all feel like they really each have a very specific way that they can help out. And I can see how having all 6 of them combined could really be a huge benefit. And if you're able to, figure out how to best make them work together. And like, it's just, every problem you see on the board is addressed by one of these people. One of these roles gives you a way to better address that problem you're seeing on the board. This game is just a ton of fun. It really, really is. Obviously, this is a paid preview. Take, everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, but I have thoroughly enjoyed my time learning this game and playing around with it and seeing all these different influence cards in here and really thinking about some of the stuff that is just kind of going on that we just kind of take for granted, as that's just the way it is. I highly recommend that you definitely go over and at least check out the Earth Rising campaign. It is going to be going on. I'm actually not sure how many days it's going on, but it started April 26th, or it's starting April 26th. This probably will go up a day or two before it starts. And check it out, because this is one of the most well put together prototypes I've ever seen. And it has just a solidly built rule set already. The rule book I only had a couple of questions from the rules, and obviously stuff that, they're still ironing out prior to the campaign and then before production or anything. But if the amount of care and detail that they've put into building this game, this prototype and the game and the rules reflects what's going to happen with the Kickstarter, then this should be a really a successful Kickstarter. And I believe that people are going to find that this game is a lot of fun and can be a really not only fun time, but thought-provoking time. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. Click the bell so you don't miss anything. We've got all kinds of stuff happening right now, all kinds of great content coming out. And until next time, if you're bored online, bored offline.